Robert, you and Betty have been together now for how long?
We've been married for 62 years and we've known each other over 70 years.
Amazing. And tell me, when did you first notice any change in Betty in terms of the memory and self-care?
About 8 years ago when we used to drive up to my mother's place at Wentworthville, and she was a little bit slow in stopping at traffic lights, and I was getting a bit worried. And she kept forgetting things, and our family made a joke of it.
Okay.
And we had a list on the fridge.
Okay.
And if you did something silly or forgot something, you went to the top of the list.
Okay.
So the standard joke in our family was, you tried to get to the top of the list.
And so Betty was trying to get to the top of the list, were you?
Yes, and then but I noticed that she was forgetting things. And
what sorts of things? People's names, places?
Oh, yes, people's names, and if we were out somewhere to a concert, and they say, hello Betty, and kiss her, and I could see by the look on Betty's face she didn't know.
Yeah.
And I used to say, well, I know the face, but I've forgotten the name, and they'd tell me their name. Then afterwards I'd tell them that Bet was getting a memory loss. Well, it was very hard coping with it at first, and my family kept saying, we had a few family meetings, and they says, you should take Betty and put her in care.
Yeah.
And I'll put her in her home, as they mentioned it.
And give me just a little reminder of the sorts of day-to-day things that would cause problems. So we'd gone beyond forgetting names and places.
Oh, well then she'd be talking with her eyes open, and in the middle of a sentence go,
and just fall asleep.
And then I got home care in, they used to shower, and they used to be worried sometimes because Betty'd fall asleep while they were showering her.
Yeah.
She fell out of bed, and I came in and she was unconscious on the floor, and I rang for an ambulance. She was in Wollongong Hospital. And I joined the Dementia Awareness Group, Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And they have a sit around of half a dozen people or so, and we have sharing and we relate to each other.
And that's like a support
that was
group
the
for
catalyst for putting in care, because they said I would feel guilty.
Yeah.
See, and I did. When Betty first went away, I had a guilty complex, and they said, well, don't. But then the weights were lifted off my shoulders. And you're back
to being
being
friends rather than being the support person.
Right.
So that's been helpful.
Yeah, and that was a great thing. And then I used to, and I used the internet, and I used a lot of study. But one of the most important things was you don't argue.
Yes, and that's what I was about to ask you. So tell me some of the things that could cause distress between you. So the sorts of things that Betty might get confused or annoyed about.
Well, if I said, oh, you've already told me that, I'd notice you'd stiffen up and shake the hand and says, no, you haven't.
Yeah.
And then I learnt is you don't argue.
Yeah.
And you agree with everything.
And just try
then you also, and the people with dementia I notice, and with Betty too, she'd say to me sometimes, you're angry with me, aren't you? No. So you learnt to smile even if you was a bit depressed.
Yeah.
So I used to practice in front of the mirror.
Okay.
So, but it's important because they're very susceptible to your moods. So if you're looking a bit glum, what's wrong?
Yeah.
And the catalyst that made to move into the thing, I used to have trouble with tablets. And they have down there with tablets. She secretes them somewhere.
So she doesn't always manage to swallow things properly.
And she was on to 8 tablets at a time.
Yeah.
And was sitting on the lounge and giving a breakfast. And I'd give her, say, you've got to take these before you have your breakfast, okay? Open your mouth. And then, but with this thing here that nearly broke my heart was, I said, you swallow them, here's a glass, drink the water, And she went forward and she spat them all out into the porridge. And I broke down and cried.
Yeah.
And she says, "You don't love me anymore, do you?" And that was then...
I think what you're describing there is that you're trying your best to do all the things
Yes.
to keep her well and to care for her. She can't... You didn't want any of that, did you?
No, thank
But
you.
then when
And
she
she's-
sees you distressed, she actually can't interpret why that is
No,
either. So it's a
that's right.
very stressful thing for both of you.
I don't get upset now. I used to be depressed, and depression is an insidious thing. It manifests itself. So I learned to put on a brave face even if I'm not down.
You're right.
And I think of funny things and laugh. The best medicine of all is laughter.
Absolutely.
You realise I married an older woman, don't you?
What?
I used to take her home to my mother's. We met at Sunday school, and we used to go, when we were about 14, 15, I took her home a couple of times because it was the St Andrew's Church of England at Summer Hill, and we were both in the choir, and she used to sit opposite with her sister, and the women on one side, men on the other. So. And so she said later on in life that I was more keen on her sister than she was. It's not true.
I don't believe that,
But
do you?
I took her home to my mother. She kept saying, "Son, that's the girl you should marry." I said,
There you
"But Mum,
are."
she's older than me." She said, "It doesn't matter, son. An older woman is wiser and had more experience." And no one ever told me what she meant. I can't find out.
I don't know whether you've had any thoughts about the future or plans or how
Oh
you'd
yes,
like
I've put
things to
everything
be.
in place about the palliative.
Why would you prefer that to going in and out of hospital or in and out of emergency departments? How does Betty
Well,
find
if Betty fell over down there and broke her arm, well, she could go to the hospital and have it reset. But if Betty got pneumonia or a chest infection or something like that, and they say, "Well, do you want her to go to hospital or stay here?" I say, "Stay here."
Yeah, and that's
Because she's in the environment that she's used to. I've been to Wollongong Hospital several times with her, and she's been very distressed.
That's exactly right. So that familiarity and that routine actually allows Betty to maintain her dignity and to be less distressed. And unfortunately, in a busy hospital, moving from department to department with changes of staff is really quite distressing. Betty, I don't know if you remember much about Wollongong when you've been in the emergency department. It's pretty busy.
Was it?
Yeah. But I think the times that Robert's been with you, it's quite distressing for Betty.
Yes.
So that's great that you've managed to have that chance to understand the progression of the disease and to plan ahead for a way that maintains dignity and keeps you involved rather than losing control.
Yeah.
Did you
Yes,
find that
but-
process difficult, thinking that through?
No, well, I'm in the Arcadians, and in the last 6 months have been 7 of them died.
Okay.
And they're all younger than me, which is a bit of a worry.
All right.
So no, I went to a funeral last week, one of the lamplighters. But
Yeah.
no, I've got everything in place. I've got our plot down there and at Hooker, and everything's paid for.
So do you find that that's actually taken a bit of pressure off, the fact you've got
Oh,
all your
yes,
plans?
yes.
And I would imagine that takes a lot of pressure off your family because they know what your wishes are.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I'm going to. I'm going to do my own eulogy, I think. And we sit out in the backyard because it's got a lovely garden. She loves the flowers and everything. And we can be sitting there for 20 minutes and say, "Can I go home now?" She only does it to trick me, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think you're tricking them.
But she's happy, and that
She's very
makes me happy.
And they Mom.